Hi everyone, this is Danielle Steadman, and I am your host of Dogman Diaries. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me tonight. I'd also like to introduce you all to our guest, Elaina Maraino. Hello, Elaina.
Hello.
Elaina, could you just kind of tell us briefly where you're from, your age, things like that, what you do?
I am originally from Dayton, Kentucky. I was married in 1965 to a minister, and we moved to rural Arizona in 1973. I'm currently 70. My son is currently 35, and my grandson is currently 10. We lived in the Sonora Desert for 17 years, and then in the mountains of New Mexico for 3 years, and came back here to northern Kentucky in 1993 because my mother-in-law had had a series of strokes, and my husband's brothers were trying to get her to go into an assisted living situation. So we've been back here since 1993 at this point.
Before we get into it, I just want to ask you, before this incident took place, did you believe in cryptids at all?
Yes, I did. I lived in the Sonora Desert for 17 years and in the mountains of New Mexico for 3 years, and I have had experience with witches and skinwalkers and things like that in the past. So I was really not surprised by this incident at all when it happened.
Oh, wow. It sounds like you have led quite an extraordinary life. You have a riveting story to tell my audience tonight. Well, I guess at this time, Elaina, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm just going to let you tell our listeners exactly what happened.
Okay. In 1987, we traveled from our home in the Sonoran Desert to Los Banos, California. My husband was a minister with the Assemblies of God, and we were going to hold a meeting in an old house that had been converted into a church. We had a Greyhound bus that had been converted into a motorhome, and we parked the bus next to the church. And at 11 o'clock at night, we turned off the electricity and opened the windows because it was the summer of 1987 in California, and it was a very rural area way out from the town. We had a couch in the living room that converted to a double bed. Then there was a queen-size bed built over the engine at the back of the bus. So my son was 7 at the time. My husband and I took turns sleeping in the queen-size bed with my son, and the other one would spend the night on the double bed at the front of the bus. So this happened to my husband first. The bus windows on the bus were more like portholes than anything else at the back of the bus, and they were about 7 feet off the ground. My husband was on the outside of the bed with my son next to the wall, and he felt something feeling around on his face, and he woke up, and it was a werewolf. Big hairy arm with a big paw on the end of it sticking through the window, and he just got up and closed the window and went back to sleep. So the next night, I was sleeping in the queen-size bed with my son, who was 7, and I woke up, and there was a huge hairy arm with a big paw on the end of it trying to get past me to get to my son. And I got very angry because I'm a Christian, and it just really bothers me when things like that try to pick on my child. So I began to rebuke it. I got up and pushed the arm back through the window, and it was kind of puzzled at first. I guess it wasn't expecting me to react that way because I'm not a large person. At that time, I was about 5'3". And I began to rebuke it with scriptures. I pushed the arm back outside the window, but I did not close the window because it was hot. I told my son to go back to sleep, and we did. We got back in the bed and went back to sleep. But that was not the first thing that something like that had happened with us. So my husband preached anywhere that was available. He went to churches that had less than congregation of 40. He preached in people's living rooms or people's backyards or even an open field as long as people were willing to come out. So we traveled around a lot, and like I said, we lived in the Sonoran Desert where things like that tend to have a tendency to prowl. And then later, after we got back to the Sonoran Desert, my husband would go off in the bus by himself, and my son and I would be home. We lived on the old Butterfield stage route, in rural Cochise County. And there was a very powerful coven of witches that lived on one of the ranches close by, and they would come and teleport into my son's room in the middle of the night. So when my husband wasn't home, my son would sleep in the master bedroom with me, and I would have to play scripture tapes all night long. They would leave the house, just, hang around in the yard. But it was always my son that they were after, and I had to keep very close track on that. And lots of times I would have to pray all night, play scripture tapes all night just to keep them at bay. But things like that have followed him all of his life.
Oh, my goodness. Now, when we're talking about the creature, can you tell me what it looked like, how tall it was?
It was immense. I'd say it was over 7 feet tall. And it looked like the monster from the Michael Jackson Thriller video, but it was much, much bigger than that. It was just it was convinced of its own power and did not expect to be thwarted by a 5'3" woman.
Oh, I'm sure that was very shocking.
It was very puzzled at first.
Oh, I can't imagine how puzzled it was. Your son had told me that you are a fairly small lady, so I'm sure it had no idea what was going on.
I'm sure it was just as puzzled when my husband pushed its arm back through the window and closed the window.
So, did you get a look at the creature's face really well?
Yeah, it had a whole lot of teeth.
Oh, wow. Did it have a muzzle?
Modified, I would say. Not a very long, pointed snout like a wolf, but bigger than a person.
What about its eyes? Do you recall what colors they were?
They were red.
Oh, they were red. Oh, wow. And you said it was over how tall?
It was over 7 feet tall.
Oh, wow.
The portholes or windows in that part of the bus were about 6 feet 8, I'd say, and he would have had to squat slightly to look through the window. That's why the only part sticking through the window was his arm.
Oh, my goodness. And you had told me in the pre-interview you felt like this creature was after your son?
It was after my son.
Oh, my goodness. That just, I would just think that would be terrifying.
If I wasn't a Christian, it probably would have been, but I truly do believe that my life is hid in Christ with God, and the creature would have had to go through me to get to my son, and I wasn't by myself. My belief in God makes me strong and takes out fear.
Well, I can definitely say you are one very brave lady. I applaud you for your bravery in this incident. Has this incident changed your life at all? Did it change, how you went about doing things? Were you afraid to come outside?
No.
So it didn't change your ways at all?
No, I was very careful of my son. I did not let my son go out after dark. I never have let my son go out after dark by himself. When you live in the desert, there are rattlesnakes and scorpions and poisonous centipedes and all manners of things like that. So I never did let my son go out after dark by himself. But I became more watchful than I already was.
And you said the incident took place in 1987 in the summertime, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Is there anything you would like for the viewers to know about this incident if they were to run into a creature like this? How maybe they could deter it?
Other than prayer, I don't know of any other way. It all depends on the source of the power. They have to have power from somewhere to do what they do, to be shapeshifters. And I believe that the power of God is supreme. There is no power greater than that, so his power is greater than their power. But if you're not a believer, you're kind of unprotected.
So you feel like this creature was a supernatural type of creature?
Oh, yes. Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, do you believe that the coven is what summoned the creature, I would assume?
No, that was in California, and the coven was where we lived on the Butterfield stage route in Cochise County, Arizona.
Oh, okay. So was there something that you think summoned this creature to y'all, or do you think it was just happenstance that it found?
Other than the fact that my son was 7 years old and vulnerable, he wasn't as strong in his faith as his dad and I were. We were older.
Okay.
Let's see, in 1987 I would have been 41. And I had been a Christian for a very long time. My son was, even though we took him to church all the time, he was still just a little boy, and he didn't always listen to what was being done in church. So it was my son, the vulnerable one, that the creature was after. My reaction would have been exactly the same if it had been a grizzly bear. Whether it was a natural creature or a supernatural creature, it was still after my child.
Right. Now, after this happened, did you guys see that creature anymore, or?
No, after those 2 times, once with my husband and once with myself, it never bothered us anymore.
Really? It just
was after we came back home to the Sonora Desert.
Oh, okay. So, basically,
it's also a very rural area that the witches started to pester us.
Oh, gosh. That's just horrible. So, you guys left that area not long after this happened and went back to your home?
We were there about a month, I think.
Oh, okay. And this happened in the beginning, middle, end of the month?
Very beginning of the month.
Oh, wow. So, it happened right when you first got there?
Mm-hmm.
So, is this place, I'm assuming it's desert, so is there trees, water?
It's not too very far from the vineyards. California has a lot of vineyards, and this was a farm, maybe just 50 miles from the beginning of the vineyards in the California wine country.
Oh, okay.
Around Modesto, that area of California. But it was a farm. No one was living there at the time. They had turned the farmhouse into a church, and they just came after their regular jobs to work the farm in the evenings and the weekends and harvest, and they still had cattle there. And it was still a working farm. It's just that no one lived on the property.
Oh, wow.
And we did have our dog with us. I had a 15-pound Yorkie, and the dog didn't even bark.
Oh, I believe in a pre-interview with your son, he had told me that the dog was actually hidden under the bed.
The dog was probably in the living room with Virgil because what was under the bed was the engine compartment of the bus, and you couldn't get to it from the inside. You had to go outside and lift a hatch to get to the bus engine.
Now, your son had told me generally this little dog is very, I guess, happy and barking and bouncing around, and on this particular night it was very quiet. And
it was very quiet.
He didn't come out at all then?
No, stayed hidden, stayed quiet.
Oh, I don't blame it. I would have too. So, other than this, well, I guess these 2 incidents that you and your husband had, did you have any other incidents ever with a creature like this, or is this the only creature y'all ever encountered? I mean, that was
our house was in rural Arizona. It was 8 miles to town. And one night, Virgil decided to go into town for ice cream or something, and he got into the car, which was parked inside a chain-link fence in front of our house, and opened the gate and looked in the rearview mirror to back out to go onto the road, and there was a werewolf in the back seat. I said, "What on earth did you do?" He said, "I didn't do anything. I just pretended like I didn't see it, and when I got to town and parked the car, it got out too." I said, "I would never have done that. I would have told it to get out of my car, and if it wanted to go to town, it could walk the 8 miles."
Oh, wow. Okay, your husband had one of these things in the car.
In the car, and rode in the car with it for 8 miles.
Was he not I mean, he wasn't terrified?
No,
Oh, my.
He was a minister, and he believed the same thing that I believe, that nothing ever happens to us that God can't handle. But I wouldn't have given it a ride. If it wanted to go down, it could walk the 8 miles.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, Lord. So,
it was up to no good, and I don't believe in facilitating something like that, and whatever it's up to that is going to hurt somebody.
Right. Did it not growl or?
No, it just sat there and was quiet all the way to town. And when he parked the car and left the car, it got out too.
Oh, my heavens. That is remarkable. Wow. I'm sitting here. You hadn't told me that. I'm completely blown away at this moment. Wow. That's incredible. Wow.
And then in that one instance, it was not after my child. My child was at home in the house. It was my husband that was out in the night.
So what do you think that one wanted?
I don't know. Our house was 8 miles from town. We were surrounded by ranchers all around, ranches. And I don't know what it was doing out in the countryside. I don't know if it had accomplished what it wanted to do and was trying to get back to town, or if it lived out there where we lived and wanted to go into town and hurt somebody. I don't know what it was doing. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and that was a very small town. As they say out west, they roll up the sidewalks at 6 o'clock. The only thing open after dark is the gas station and the Dairy Queen.
Now, I know you said that you feel like these creatures are supernatural. Do you think that perhaps that one was from this coven?
It could have been, but mostly the trouble we had with the witches were, let's see if I can remember what Shirley, she's Warren Beatty's sister. Anyway, I read a book that she wrote where she traveled outside of her body, and there was a thin silver cord where her body stayed at home, and her spirit went to travel. Mostly that's the trouble we had out there with the witches' coven, was they would transport themselves, not their physical bodies, but their spirits, into my house in the middle of the night and pester my son. When my husband would go to the other end of the house and leave we had a split floor plan, so it was like 54 feet from the master bedroom to my son's room. My husband would go get into the bed and wait for one of them to show up, and we recognized them. They were not there physically, but we recognized them because their spirit looked just like the person that it was traveling away from. And he would just tell them to get out and quote scriptures at them, but they never stopped trying.
Now, any of your neighbors or anyone from your congregation, had you ever heard of one of them maybe having trouble with one of these spirit werewolves? Or
we did tell the people who owned the farm about it, and they said things like that had happened a couple of times when they actually lived on the farm, but they had all, moved into town and had other jobs, and some of them had businesses. But when they first came to California from Mexico, when they immigrated, and there was several people living in that house, several families, they did have things like that happen once or twice when they were living in the house.
Oh, wow.
Where we were holding our church services.
So had any of these creatures ever attacked, like, livestock or anything?
Yes, they had lost some livestock when they first moved there.
Did you ever hear of anyone being attacked?
Mostly they didn't go outside after dark. If they heard the dogs barking or a ruckus in the chicken house, they just cut their losses. They did not go out there.
Wow, it sounds like maybe they had quite a lot of this going on then.
I'm sure it happens a lot in rural areas no matter where you live. But I personally don't go out after dark if it can be avoided.
I don't blame you. I don't.
And I don't. I have a 10-year-old grandson now. I don't let him go out after dark either. I'm very careful who he keeps company with, and I don't let him go out after dark. He's very well supervised.
I don't blame you. It's how I feel about my two youngest girls. They are very much supervised and watched, especially when the sun starts to set. Well, they're watched any time of the day. It doesn't much matter. Well, I really appreciate you telling us this story and, telling the viewers what has happened to you concerning these things. Is there anything you would like to say to the listeners at this point?
Just to be very wary with your children. There's a lot of things. There are evil people in the world. There are evil creatures in the world, and even just natural creatures. Like I said, when we lived in the Sonora Desert, there were rattlesnakes, there were poisonous centipedes, there were scorpions. Around here we have black widow spiders. I have black widow spiders that live under my back deck even now. Just be watchful. Just be very watchful.
Right. Yes, people need to be very watchful of these things. That is true. Well, I want to thank you, Elaina, for coming on the show and for talking with me. I appreciate it very much.
Well, you're very welcome.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight. I hope you appreciated and enjoyed the story. As always, if you have a Dogman story or you know of a friend or a family member that has a story, then please contact me. Attention, Danielle, I have a story at Dogman Diaries at gmail.com or on Facebook at Dogman Diaries. Here at Dogman Diaries, we will never judge you or your story. I'm a believer because I'm also a survivor too. And remember, if you're like me and people inquire about why you're so afraid of the dark, simply reply, I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of what could be lurking in the dark. Have a great weekend, folks. Until next time, be safe and be blessed. My thoughts and prayers are with you all. Good night.